It's good to see everyone here this evening. If you would turn to Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8 will be starting there in just a few moments. A couple weeks ago, Brian asked me to fill in tonight. Him and Deb are, of course, in Chicago area, so keep them in your thoughts and prayers that they should be on the way back home tomorrow. And of course, with the weather that's going through the country, that might be a little bit of a challenge for them, but hopefully not. Also, continue to remember Jill in your prayers. She's at home recovering from the fall that she had and a break on her arm, and she went to the doctor yesterday. As old saying goes, so far so good, but she goes back in, I think, 4 weeks to recheck it and make sure it's healing the way it's supposed to. And if it is, fine. But there is a very slight chance she might have to have the replacement or surgery to fix it if it's not. So keep her in your thoughts and prayers. There's a couple other announcements, but Randy will have those toward the near the end of the service this evening. We've been studying Luke chapter 8 last few weeks. Jesus begins by telling us about the women who were part of Jesus' ministry, how they ministered to Jesus, taking care of him, the parable of the sower, and a couple other things like the healing of the man with several demons. And now at the end of the chapter, which we'll read here in just a moment, they have the healing of, hopefully I won't butcher it too much, the healing of Jairus' daughter. And also, this is one of those rare occasions we get I guess you can call it a twofer, because within Jairus coming to ask about his daughter, you have another healing, so we'll be talking about this evening. Randy, if you would, read Luke 8, beginning verse 40, and to the end of the chapter.
Sure thing. Verse 40. It came to pass that when Jesus was returned, the people gladly received him, for they were all waiting for him. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. And he fell down at Jesus' feet, besought him that he would come into his house, for he had only one only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she lay a-dying. But as he went, people thronged him. And a woman having an issue of blood 12 years, which had spent all her living upon physicians, neither could be healed of any, came behind him and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her issue of blood stanched or dried up. And Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When all denied, Peter and they that were with him said, "Master, the multitude throng thee and press thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me?" And Jesus said, "Somebody hath touched me, for I perceive that virtue is going out of me." And when the woman saw that she was not hid, she came trembling, falling down before him. She declared unto him before all the people for what cause she had touched him, and how she was healed immediately. And he said unto her, "Daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace." While he yet spake, there cometh one of the ruler of the synagogue house, saying to him, "Thy daughter is dead, trouble not the master." But when Jesus heard it, he answered him and said, "Fear not, believe only, and ye shall be made whole." And when he came into the house, he suffered no man to go in, save Peter and James and John, and the father and mother of the maiden. And all wept and bewailed her. But he said, "Weep not, she is not dead, but sleepeth." And they laughed him to scorn, knowing that she was dead. And he put them all out, took her by the hand, called, saying, "Maid, arise." And her spirit came again. She arose straightway, and he commanded to give her meat. And her parents were astonished. But he charged them that they should tell no man what was done.
Thank you, Randy, for reading that. That was a rather lengthy reading, but to put everything out there for us this evening. Just one quick question as we consider these two miracles that take place within another. It says in verse 40 that the people were waiting on Jesus. Of course, if you go back in the chapter, Jesus and his disciples, granted there's several things going on in the chapter, but as part of the narrative, they are going from place to place, traveling from village to town and so forth. And it says the people were waiting for him. Often, what can we say about the size of the multitudes that would be a part of Jesus' life?
They're usually large.
Usually large. Granted, they would vary from time to time depending on the time of the year and what part of Israel, whether you talk about the Galilean area such as we are now, or whether it's down toward Jerusalem or some other part as Jesus and his disciples travel. And to give you a little hint, in the next chapter, chapter 9, kind of looking forward, hopefully we'll get to this at least to mention it a little bit later, is one of the occasions in which Jesus feeds the multitudes. And what do we know about those two occasions? Not only the one in the next chapter, but the other one as well. What size of crowd were they? Thousands. Yeah, exactly. One was 5,000, another 4. And the one in the next chapter is one that it's 5,000. And it is interesting that Luke records for us there, that was just the men. So what can we infer as we consider that aspect of that particular miracle? Kind of give you something to look forward to in discussion. What can we infer from the fact that that was just the number of men?
More women and children.
Yeah. Well, what about the women and children? So if you have 5,000 men roughly, what size crowd are you then looking at if you include women and children?
10 or 12,000.
Yeah, 10 or 12,000. So you begin to see the size of multitudes that will sometimes be surrounding Jesus. And if you remember earlier in this chapter, who came seeking for Jesus? They were they were kind of close to Jesus. What? His family. Yeah, his mother and his brothers were coming to look for him, but because of the size of the crowd, they couldn't get to Jesus. So keep that in mind as we go, that at least most of the time, the multitudes would be at least in the hundreds, if not the thousands. And so keep that in mind. And as these people were waiting for Jesus, who comes at this time and approaches Jesus? Jairus. Who is he?
Ruler of the synagogue.
A ruler of the synagogue. What is the synagogue?
That's a Jewish worship place.
A Jewish place of worship. So what kind of position would this be, him being a ruler of synagogue?
He'd be with a lot of authority.
Yeah, it'd be a position of authority. And so what's interesting is he comes to Jesus, what does he do? Falls down before him. So you have this man who's the ruler of the synagogue, a person accustomed to authority, being in charge of people. And not only that, but after the woman with the issue of blood is healed, who comes to Jairus and those there? Is a member of, what is that? Another one of the rulers. So, you know, he's accustomed to, at least to some degree, granted we can't know to what extent, but he's accustomed to authority. He's accustomed to being around those with authority, but yet when he comes to Jesus, he does what?
Ask him to heal his daughter.
Ask him to heal his daughter. How old is his daughter? 12. The reason I ask that is to help us to learn to try to pay attention to the details as we study, whether it's Luke or any of the scriptures, to pay attention to the details that are recorded to us or for us by God. What seems to be a problem?
But when he came to Jericho, his daughter dead.
Yeah, told him that she was dead. And as the beginning part of it says that she is sick. near death. But as Jesus is now going to take care or heal Jairus' daughter, what takes place is they're en route, so to speak. What's that? Yes, she dies. But not only does she die, but again, we have a miracle within a miracle. As there, Jairus comes, bows down before him. Please heal my daughter. They go. And as they go, the multitudes are doing what? A woman touched Jesus? What did you say, Jim?
They're all following behind him.
Yeah, they're following behind them. And not only following behind them, but they're, as we can see the story unfold, they are literally what around Jesus? Crowding him. They're crowding him. And you can imagine, again, as we noted, the multitudes that follow Jesus usually we could say we're at least in the hundreds of people, if not occasionally, literally thousands of people. And just stop to think about it. The multitude that's fed in the next chapter is 5,000 men. Let's not even worry about the women and children. What's the population of Hayden City? 2,200. Maybe 22, maybe even say for mass sake, 2,500. So you got 5,000 men and Payton City is 2,500. What does it say about the multitude? It's overwhelming. You got 2 Payton cities there that need to be fed. So you can imagine the scene as Jesus is going with at least, even if you say just hundreds of people, what that scene must have been like is Jesus and the hundreds, if not thousands of people are going from one place to another. A city, a small town on the move. When's the last time you've ever seen anything like that? Yeah. How many of you have ever gone to Morgantown for a ball game? Whether basketball or football. Coliseum, I think what holds 10 to 12. What? 14,000. I knew somebody would give me the correct answer. Thank you. I knew in this crowd that there's somebody had to know the answer. 14,000 people. Mountaineer Stadium holds 60. And if you go to Tuscaloosa, 102. Yes, I'm a Bama fan. But I've also said, let's go Mountaineers plenty of times too. Me and Jill's going to get outfits, one side Alabama, other side West Virginia, with a coat for Pittsburgh, but that's another story. So you got this crowd of people, and in the midst of this hustle and bustle, Jesus notices something. And what's that? Somebody touched him. Peter. You gotta love Peter. What was Peter's response? If my memory serves me correctly, I think it was Peter. Yeah. Peter's observation was a rather astute and rather correct observation. Lord, Lord, you got these hundreds, if not thousands of people. What? You can almost hear Peter saying, what else do you expect? Somebody's going to touch you. How did Jesus respond? Yeah, he felt the power. Is there anything that we can learn from that? You ever considered the power that Jesus had? To where when somebody just simply touched, again, jumping ahead a little bit in the story, somebody just literally touched the hem of his garment, they could feel the difference. Yeah.
She was touching him for the purposes of hopefully having, a healing.
Yeah. And we can go to the other gospel accounts. I meant to look it up and try to write it down, but you can go to the other gospel accounts and see that's indeed what her purpose was. That's what her desire was, to simply just to touch the hem of his garment and hope for a healing.
This shows Jesus' power over life and death.
Yes. Why is that? Is that important? And if so, why?
Great faith.
Yeah. Well, on her account,
All I gotta do is touch that.
yeah, on her part, there's the lesson of great faith on her part. But what about on the part of Jesus? That just simply touching the hem of his garment. If you've been noticing, I've been touching my shirt sleeves. Just touching it, power goes from him to her. And she's healed.
This shows Jesus' compassion.
Yeah, it shows his compassion. Let me put it this way for you. Let me ask this question. If he has the power to do that by simply touching the hem of his garment, what about our sins? Does he have the power?
That's the reason he came here.
Yeah, that's the reason why he came here. The gospel, according to Paul's definition in Romans chapter 1, the gospel is what? God's power to salvation. How do we know that the gospel has God's power to salvation? How is that illustrated for us in Scripture? Let me suggest for your thinking that this miracle, as well as all the other miracles recorded for us, are an example of Jesus and God's power. If Jesus can calm the storms by saying, "Peace, be still," and heal this woman by her just simply through faith touching his garments, can he and does he have the power to forgive and remit my sins? Very much so.
Also in John 20 and 31, but these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and believing you might have life through his name. And that's for each and every one of us.
Yeah.
When we read these, to know they are true and see the power of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Again, especially when it comes to Luke's account. Luke, by profession, is what? A physician. Is that important? And let me ask you this question. Is that important, and if so, why? When it comes to this miracle, the healing of Jairus' daughter, all the others that Luke records for us, Luke, being a physician, is important in what regard?
Gives the testimony validity.
Yes.
Healing was immediate and complete.
Yes. Stop and think about that. Luke, being a physician, gives, and him recording these things for us, gives validity that these things actually took place. Because if anybody could show them to be false, who could? A physician. Now, if these were just made-up stories that men made up, a physician trained in various things. Granted, I guess in one sense you could be made medical knowledge back then. It was not what it is now. But even then, to be a physician, Luke had to be what? An educated man. To illustrate something else for you, just for, we can build skyscrapers today, build a lot of buildings, and we use all sorts of power tools and equipment, from Caterpillars and John Deere tractors and so forth. How did they build the pyramids, and how did the Romans build their roads? Did the Romans use a Caterpillar tractor to build the roads that they used back in the first century?
They use slave labor.
They used slave labor, but they built it without technology. All the ancient ruins, whether it's the pyramids, the aqueducts that the Romans used to take water from one place to another, the roads, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, all of that was built without the technology that we have today. In other words, it took human ingenuity for what that's worth. So they had to be smart people, didn't they? Yes, Jim is right, they used slave labor, but even then, to do it with slave labor without mechanical means to do it. That is, again, tractors and power tools and all that. They had to be pretty smart to do it.
Noah built the ark the same way.
Yes, and Noah built the ark the same way. Noah had the first shipyard. Without the use of cranes and tractors and power tools. Again, the ark that they built, I think it's in Kentucky. I can't remember where in Kentucky, but the ark that they built there took over 1,000 train loads of lumber. Over 300, is at least 3 million board feet of lumber. You can look it up to see exactly how many if you want to. And Noah did all that without a Black & Decker tool or Craftsman tool. He did it all by hand. He had to be pretty smart to be able to do it, right? So if anybody could see through the healing of anybody and everybody, to get back to the original point, Luke would be able to do so because he was an educated man. He would have had to gone through whatever college, whether it's at Alexandria in Egypt or whatever Roman or Greek university would have been available. To become a doctor, even in the first century, he had to have an education of some sort. And he could see through a fraud if this was indeed a fraud. But his recording of this for us shows it to be what? To be valid.
You think that's the reason Jesus picked him?
I think that's, in essence, again, this is just my thought. I would say yes. I think that's part of the reason why Luke was chosen to record these things for us. Because if anybody could see through these things, if they were false, Luke would be able to do so, but his recording of these things puts a stamp of validity. These things took place. So what can that do for our faith? Our faith can be rest assured that Paul tells us in Romans chapter 10, verse 17, what about our faith? By hearing God's word. So if we hear what Luke says about what happened, we know that God's word is indeed what? True. What Luke records about Jairus' daughter, what he records about this woman, what he records about all the other things he says, is valid, it's true. Our faith can be assured that it's based upon reality. Jesus asked the question, who touched me? What did as we read the few verses there, what did some of the people begin to say? It was not me. It wasn't me, Lord. I didn't touch you. What's it say about the woman, though? As person by person began to say, it wasn't me. Can you begin to see what happens to the crowd? Because What does it say about the woman in that context?
That she came trembling and falling down before him and declared unto him before all the people for what cause she had touched him, and how she was healed immediately.
So thank you for reading that for us again. So as person by person began to say that it wasn't me, you can imagine the crowd. They're looking from one to another. Is it you? Is it you? Was it you? And person by person, no, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. Eyes began to draw upon this woman, and she came trembling. What does that say about her at this time? Yeah. Yeah. She had an honest heart. If somebody's trembling, it's a sign that they're what? Yeah. It's a sign that she was nervous. What? Go ahead.
She came to Christ and touched him in the midst of the crowd so she wouldn't be noticed.
Yes.
And now he's asking for the person who touched him. So that's why she's trembling.
Yeah.
She's found, she knows that Christ knows who touched
Yeah.
him in his garment.
And so when the eyes began to focus on her, she kind of was nervous. When a person becomes nervous, they start to what? Some people start to tremble. I will tell a story on myself. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to preach for the congregation where my mom and dad go. They live in Gardendale, Alabama, for those of you who are in the Birmingham area of Alabama. And the reason I mention that is because the church there is roughly, at that time, probably 225, 250 members. Now it's closer to 3. But that was one of the largest crowds of people I personally had the opportunity to preach before. And I don't know why it was on this occasion, but that's back when I was a little bit smaller and could actually put on a coat and tie. And so I got up, and of course this is before I lost my sight, got up in the pulpit and turned around to face the people and had the remote in my hand for the PowerPoint because I had the PowerPoint with me. For some reason or another, I had the worst case nerves when I turned and faced the audience. So much so I had to keep my hand down by my side behind the podium because I was literally, if you were to look at my hand was literally trembling. And it took me a good 5 or 10 minutes to get it to quit before I could finally move outside from the podium to speak. And that's the reason why I mention this, because she came trembling. You can imagine her nervousness, her fear, as all eyes, as people were saying, no, it wasn't me, I didn't do it, I didn't touch you. They all, okay, who was it? That all eyes, as they began to look around, they would begin to focus on her. Do most people like to be the center of attention?
Oh, yeah.
Well, some people do, but for some people, no. Some people do not like to be the center of attention. They don't want to be the focal point. They want to be, as we would say, they want to be the wallflower. And as Bob pointed out, in the midst of this crowd, that her desire to simply touches him, and with this big crowd, she's hoping, you can almost sense that she was hoping to do that without being noticed. But now she is being noticed.
Says she did it in front of all the people.
Yeah. Now she's out front. Now all eyes are looking on her. And as was pointed out several minutes ago, what a testimony for her this is, though. That even in the midst of this, what could be an embarrassing moment for some people, She affirmed what she did and why she did it, and this is a testimony for her faith. That even just a simple act of touching the hem of his garment, she had the faith that she would be healed. Let me ask you this question. Would we have had the faith to do what she did?
Hope so.
You don't have to raise your hands, but with my bad eyesight, I probably, unless it's Billy and Amy and Rachel over here, unless you're one of these three people, I won't see you. But how many of us have health problems? Two open heart surgeries, lost most of my eyesight, and that's just part of the list. I won't bore you with the rest of it. I know that there's many here who are dealing with various ailments that we mention publicly from time to time, and I'm sure that doesn't include the ones that we don't make known to everybody. If Jesus was here and we could touch his garment, would we have the faith? This woman did. What does this say about her? And somebody mentioned it a few minutes ago. What does this say about her? Well, as this concludes, again, as we noted a few moments ago as well, what news comes concerning Jairus' daughter? She died. She died. And how is it put forth at this time? How is the news broken? What was exactly said?
Thy daughter is dead, trouble not.
Yeah. Your daughter, they were pretty straightforward. Your daughter's dead. And that would be, that's hard enough news to begin with. But don't trouble the master. What can we learn about that part? What are they saying about Jesus when they put it in this way? Yeah. By saying it this way, they're acknowledging to some extent who he is and the power that he has. Sherry's right, they're talking about his power, but because of his power, that puts him in a certain position, doesn't it? Master.
He tells them there in verse 50, he says, do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well.
Do not be afraid, only believe, she'll be well. How big of a problem is fear? How big of a problem is it to be afraid?
It can destroy a person.
Yes. Two quick illustrations along that line. Remember King Saul? He was told to go utterly destroy the Amalekites. And he came back, and Samuel came to him, and he said, Samuel, I did what was commanded me. And then Samuel, of course, asked him, then why do I hear the sheep? Does anybody remember how Saul responded? But yet, correct the people, maybe we do it, but you know, he feared the people. I feared the people, therefore I feared the people. And what happened in the next chapter, that's 1 Samuel chapter 15. Does anybody remember what happened in the next chapter? Concerning the sons of Jesse. Samuel went to the house of Jesse because he's going to anoint what? A new king. Because he feared the people, Saul no longer was going to be the king of Israel. He would rule for a short time period, but his fear cost him his position. The parable of the talents, one other real quick example. He had the 5 talent, 2 talent man, the 1 talent man. And we know that he was cast into outer darkness. Was it because he had 1 talent?
Because he was afraid.
It was because he was afraid. A passage for your consideration, if you want to read it and study it for a further date or further time, Revelation chapter 21, verse 8. It's made known to us those who have their part in the lake of fire. Notice the first one that is listed there. The fearful. Fear will cost us if we let it. And one other observation, and then we'll continue on. At the very beginning of the book of Joshua, God gives Joshua a command. Be courageous and of good cheer, if I'm getting the words right. You look it up, it's Joshua chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. What wrong definition do we often give the word courage or courageous?
People consider it to mean having no fear at all versus facing the fear.
Right. We often give courage and courageous the wrong definition, the absence of fear, but that's not what courage is. Courage is acting in spite of fear, and if you don't believe me, get a couple of different dictionaries and look it up yourself. It's a little homework assignment. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of fear. And that's what God was telling Joshua. Why? Because God was, as we go on and read what God tells Joshua, I'm with you. So why? Don't be afraid. And he's not saying to them, don't be afraid. Act in spite of your fear, because I'm with you. I was hoping to get done with this tonight. But hopefully, I appreciate everybody's participation. Appreciate everybody's comments. I've said this before and I'll say it again. It makes the class a whole lot easier to teach and hopefully a lot more, I'm lost for words, but hopefully you get a lot more out of it by everybody participating. And so I want to thank everybody again, and Lord willing, Brian will pick up with us next Wednesday night.